Now at Lowe's, faster quotes start at the Lowe's Pro Desk. Got a material list handwritten on a sticky note or saved as a photo? Perfect. Bring it to us and get a quote in minutes. And if you don't see what you need on the shelf, we'll help you get it. You can access thousands of products beyond what's available in-store or on Lowes.com, right from the Lowe's Pro Desk. Build quotes faster and source the materials you need to keep your jobs moving. Just like that, at Lowe's.
Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine before they start. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents on average 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
Translation directly of the Elohim, a plural word, the bright or shining ones, and people who were part of an advanced civilization. And that's really what we're looking at. There were other names too. They were called the Ancient Masters, and they were called the Anunnaki, and well documented in the archaeology and the history of Sumer. And so we're looking really at some very special people, not people who might be mythical, but people who were doing very practical, sensible things, like giving us brilliant laws, the edicts of An and Enlil. And also the Encyclopedia of Astronomy was called Enuma and Enlil. And the door opens and we're looking at our brilliant ancestors who delivered civilization and agriculture around about 9,400 at the end of the Younger Dryas, the great Younger Dryas Ice Age, and when all of a sudden the planet began to warm up. So there's a lot there, and we really do find that they are shining examples, and they are the Lords, El meaning a Lord, and we're looking at the archangels, the angels, and the watchers being the culture bearers who took, as I say, civilization and knowledge around the world over a period of 2,000 years. It's really puzzled the agricultural specialists to find that seeds and agricultural technology had spread all around the world within literally 2,000 years, mainly on the higher ground. And that's, along with many other things, which are too many to mention now, give us very good support for the fact that there was already an advanced civilization who were nearly wiped out by global catastrophe. And they, our ancestors, had to start all over again. I knew there was something important going on, but it didn't tumble straight away until much later, when I literally wanted to know where vegetarianism started. You know, where's this business about eating, not eating meat? And I put a phone call through to him and said, "Have you finished the big book yet, which is the Shining Ones? And what can you tell me about vegetarianism?" And he said, "Well, I published the book. I've just finished it this month, and I'll send you the proof." And he sent me the proof, and the issue of vegetarianism went off into the distance. We suddenly found that he'd written the history of the world, if you like. And when I saw it, I was absolutely staggered. And I was living in the Cotswolds in England at the time, where there were a lot of long barrows. And on the property I had, which is called Lee Sows, which means fields that were cleared for sowing, they were walled, and there were ditches for collecting rainwater. And I checked up with the British Museum, and they said, "Oh yes, the Cotswold long barrows are about 4,000 BC. And being a farmer or farming background, I suddenly realized, crikey, these people weren't just eating meat, they were growing all the crops we grow today. The whole farming package was in place. That really got me moving on the whole business of the history of agriculture and going and seeing Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien and realizing that they'd done their work, that had a very poor reception from the academics, and he was very disappointed that the academics didn't even have the courtesy to reply to letters and very important issues and points. I found much the same thing, and I've learned a lot about scientists and archaeologists, and realize you need a tremendous number of professional skills, if you look, or skills, multidisciplinary skills, and a tremendous degree of common sense to be able to work these things out. And that's what he did. He had an incredible life. He was responsible for rewriting the geology books for the Rocky Mountains, helping BP discover oil in the Rocky Mountains. His team discovered oil in Libya. He then became head of the oil operating companies in Iran after the Mossadegh nationalization. Here is a man who was at the top of his profession, received a CBE for his services to the oil industry, took his early retirement and said, I'm going to sort out the world's history. And in my opinion, that's what he did. He retired in 1971 and moved to Thaxton in Essex. And he'd always been interested in history. When he was in his first trip in the deserts of what are now the area of Persia near Susa, he was with a French French oil exploration geologist called Beaulieu, and they'd found a mound, or Beaulieu had found the mound, and they camped on it for the night and went to the top as the sun was setting, and they could see all the field systems for literally miles and miles right up to the Zagros Mountains, and suddenly realized that in that sort of desert dry area there had once been a massive farming area and rectangular shaped fields, great sophistication. And then they were sitting on top of the Dur Untush ziggurat with some cuneiform lying around. And you can imagine a young man who'd just come out from England, from Cambridge University, getting very excited about this, and that stuck with him. And he then picked up the pieces as he went along and decided that when he retired, he'd really get stuck in to work out what was happening. His first task was, when he got home, was to suddenly realize there was a line of standing stones, markers and mounds between what we call Hatfield Forest and Wandlebury, which is near Cambridge. And being a surveyor in the army during the war, during his service during the war, he accurately surveyed this line of stones and markers and found out that it was the markers were precisely 1 megalithic mile apart over 26 megalithic miles, and that it was slightly curved, and curved according to what we call the meridian, because the Earth is round, and any survey line on the Earth's surface has to be curved to be parallel to the meridian. And it was later called a loxodrome. And the whole basis of early astronomy was on loxodromes, so that you could do all the calculations of distance and time in particular when observing stars and anything else you were looking at. So what hit him between the eyes then was, wow, in 2,500 BC, we had very clever people in rural Essex and Cambridgeshire being able to know that the Earth was round, and not only that, but to know the exact dimensions of the Earth in order to construct this line, which he called Line A, the Line A, Hatfield Forest to Wandlebury Loxodrome. And that was a trigger for him to say, wow, this is important, and I've got to keep looking around for other examples of this. He found an amazing observational astronomy complex on Bodmin Moor, where I went literally a month ago to have a look. There still remains of these giant cairns. And then he realized that he had to go back to where all our ancestors came from. Most of our ancestors came from the land of Canaan, and later called Phoenicia, in the Eastern Mediterranean. And he was able to add a lot of additional work to show that our history books really did tell us a story which made sense about advanced people restarting civilization, and later, of course, deified as gods. It's a Hebrew term. There's always been a bit of conjecture about it, because in the St. James's Bible, which is the great reference, if you like, on the English Bible, there is a footnote which makes out the point that, oh yes, we know that Elohim is a plural word, but it's plural because it sort of magnifies God's majesty. It wasn't a very good explanation. And of course, since the Hebrew Bible was put together, remember it was put together in English, before that it was Greek, before that Ptolemy Philadelphus, being encouraged by his wife in Alexandria, one of Alexander the Great's generals, said, when you've got to write down all the records of the Hebrew elders. And so they had 72 of the Hebrew elders in different rooms in Alexandria with the scribes to record all the records. And what he found, Ptolemy Philadelphus and his scribes, that the Hebrew elders had remembered the whole of the Bible word for word, all the key parts of the Bible word for word. And then we realized that Ezra had rewritten everything because he wanted to really provide a new religion, a new base for the after the exile in Babylonia. And over that process of converting the language from Hebrew, a modern Hebrew in reality, into Greek, Greek into English, an awful lot of problems arose in the translation. And there's a chapter in the book which is the alternative translation of the early chapters of Genesis. It's on the website for people to go and look at, goldenageproject.org.uk. And you only have to change a small number of words to be able to see that we weren't talking about God in heaven. We were talking about the bright ones or the shining ones, or the people in the Hashemin, with a root in there of Shem, which means seed. And that translates far better into the planted highlands. So the clever people in the planted highlands as a substitute for God in heaven. And we've all got a story we can get really excited about and interested in, and listen to about their laws and their high standards, and supplement what we have already gathered about religion, is that we should observe some basic rules and live to high standards. Well, the more we look back into history and realize just how clever our ancestors were, we find that so much valuable knowledge was passed from father to son, mother to daughter, and things had to be remembered. If you were a druid, you had to be able to remember everybody of 9 generations back. Your ancestors were quite important, and they put very high store on not ancestor worship, but respect for one's ancestors, for what our ancestors had to go through for the human race to survive and to get us where we are today, one might argue.
Now at Lowe's, faster quotes start at the Lowe's Pro Desk. Got a material list handwritten on a sticky note or saved as a photo? Perfect. Bring it to us and get a quote in minutes. And if you don't see what you need on the shelf, we'll help you get it. You can access thousands of products beyond what's available in-store or on Lowe's.com, right from the Lowe's Pro Desk. Build quotes faster and source the materials you need to keep your jobs moving. Just like that, at Lowe's.
Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine before they start. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents on average 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
God is a word stuck on much later. And if you're looking at the leader of this group of wonderful people, we have somebody called An, and his wife is called Anat. So we have first of all, we have a man and woman sharing a key roles, very much equality for women and women playing key roles. And An, if you like, or he was the senior man in this group. And so we have always had a monotheistic system. It's nonsense to say we didn't have a monotheistic system. We started with one key man who was leader, and his name was An. Abraham knew that. Abraham knew An was the single important supreme being. Constantine paid his respects to An, and An and the family following on from An, the respects were paid to them at places like Baalbek until quite recently in historical terms. Hadrian built the Pantheon in honor of not just the pantheon of 9 gods who begat gods, but all the gods. The Assyrian kings did the same. I've even found that Augustine, who came to Canterbury in England and brought Catholicism, he is quoted as knowing that the ancient knowledge existed, and that there was very much more about our history, but it was adapted for use, if you like, by the Catholic Church. And there was a big battle between British Christianity, which was people like Pelagius, who said that free will is so important. And the battle was between the issue of free will, or the natural laws, which were required the free will of men and women, and somebody called Augustine of Hippo on North Africa, who insisted that we were all sinful. Certainly Eve was sinful. But if we went to church and we paid a little money to the church, we'd have our sins forgiven. So there was a major battle with religion between what I call the British Church and the Church of Rome, and that opens up all sorts of really interesting links, which perhaps we shouldn't deal with here because it very much tied in with the knowledge gained from the Path of Light, which is a translation of the Bruce and Askew codices, said to be Gnostic documents, but they're source documents recorded and witnessed by Matthew, Philip, and Thomas, 3 of the most important of Jesus's disciples. But that's for another time, I think. Okay. But what we really find is that our British Christianity, everything has evolved from this extraordinary group of people in southern Lebanon. Even if you go to the synagogue on the Friday night at the end of the week, you turn around and face the back of the synagogue and pay your respects to the mother goddess, who is Ninkasag, who was the wife of Enil, who was the son of An. And even in St. Peter's Square, you have the symbol of the Shining Ones laid out in St. Peter's Square. You have the Temple of Mithras in the basement. And so much of this wonderful story, which we need to get out to people, is incorporated in all religions, Hindus, Buddhists, Catholicism, Islam, etc. And all those religious beliefs go back to one original benevolent source. And we bring people back to that benevolent original source, then we can all live together and not be divided by different religions, but be drawn together by the fact that we all go back to that same original group. Yeah, I went to a Hindu chanting session 2 weeks ago, and I was amazed that some of the chants which come down from the Bronze Age times are to the Shining Ones. Kali, for example, is another name for Ninkasag. Buddha says, follow the Shining Ones, and it was the effect that they set the good example. All the senior Vedas gods are Shining Ones. And then you look at work of people like Lieutenant Colonel L.A. Waddell, who was one of the world's greatest linguists in the 80s, 90s, and the 20s and 30s. And he was the man who identified the Indus Valley scripts, the Vedas, as being very similar, or much the same source as the Sumerian texts, and also the British Eddas. So we have a situation where the British Eddas and the Vedas and the Sumerian texts are all one and the same from that single source. And that's very, very important. And we see this desiccation or drying out of Mesopotamia from about 2700. And Sargon I, whose correct dates are around about 2700, 2800, going off down the Silk Road and into Tibet, into China, and into India at that date. And at the same time, the big migrations to Britain, the British Isles, and also worldwide to the Americas north and south. That's very important, I think. And tying in with that, of course, now is the realization that we had the canal builders, the ancient canal builders on the east coast of the of North America, doing remarkable things when the sea level was a little lower, starting around about 6000 BC. So we've got an awful lot of fantastic history now being uncovered, which all ties this big story in together, and that's good. Well, there's a marvelous book due out very soon, which is Atlantis, the Land in the West, by a Bosnian lawyer. It'll be on my website. He's been able to recover some really important archaeological information from the libraries of Germany, in particular Leipzig, and has building on what we do know is that the original information about Atlantis was well known to the Greeks. And we're talking about the Anunnaki during the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age, surviving the Younger Dryas in that location of the large island on the site of the Azores. So that's another key factor. O'Brien did all the geology on that. There's a chapter on that in The Shining Ones and lots on the website about that. But it's likely, I think, they came from somewhere else on this planet. But they were so advanced technically, it would have been possible for them possibly to have left this planet and come back. We really are talking about an advanced civilization that could have done all manner of interesting things. And in the proof of an advanced civilization, one of my lectures, which is on the Holistic Channel, the best place to look for it, you can see a great long catalogue of information about these people. And my view is they are probably were Earth-based and certainly not spacemen. I think it's quite wrong to think of them as extraterrestrials, but it's got to be an open question because we don't really know what happened over the last 100,000 years. The dates we have for the whole crop assemblage and the domestication of crops starts around about 9,400, which was when the planet begins to warm up, and when the Jordan and Bekaa Rift valleys were suitable locations. If you can visualize the sun or the planet warming up from the equator, that area of southern Lebanon and the Jordan Valley was what we call a glacial refuge. And around that valley and into the Bekaa, we find the very earliest evidence of domesticated animals and seeds, barley and wheat. It took another 800 years before the area north of Damascus and Anatolia to warm up to allow farming there. So the idea that farming started any further north than Damascus is pretty well disposed of now by our modern knowledge. The other important point is your own American researchers, Richard Firestone in particular, with the cycle of cosmic catastrophe. What we're identifying, and many other scientists too, is that there was a very unstable period in the Earth's climate, and this is shown by the temperature variations which we can pick up from a number of different types of analysis, principally ice cores. And we had a very, very unstable, rapid swings of temperature from about 9,000, maybe sort of to the let's say to the Younger Dryas period. The big catastrophe was 10,000 850. And the belief is that that was the tail end of debris from a supernova explosion, which took place about 200 light years away. So one side of the Earth in the region of Australia was flashed, if you like, by that supernova explosion, and you get the extinction of the giant kangaroo, for example, and many of the large animals at about 39,000 BC. Then you get a secondary issues, but from that particular time right the way through to the 10,850, very violent swings in temperature. And there's a paper on the website which many people feel that agriculture simply wasn't possible between 39,000 BC and 9,400 BC. So just how they lived on the island on the site of the Azores is a question mark. Although the conditions may well have been, and we know this from coral records, and we can work out what the ocean temperatures were in the region of the Azores, and they're surprisingly warm over that Great Younger Dryas Ice Age period. Now, the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age was something between 35 and 40% of the planet was frozen, like snowball Earth. But the area around the Azores warmed by a Gulf Stream that hadn't got across to northern Europe, but certainly was a nice warm current coming up from the equator, did give the kind of conditions that may have made it possible for agriculture to be conducted in the area of the Azores. But this is really something which one day I think we may find out. But at the moment, it's speculation, it's ideas. We have a lot of technical information on temperatures and coral. The other, for people who like really exciting stories, if you think maybe that our atmosphere, the atmosphere of this planet Earth, was very severely disrupted, and fair-haired people like the shining ones had to wear sunblock, refulgent sunblock that would have made them very shining. And Enoch describes them in great detail and says that I was very frightened because they were very tall and very shining skins, etc., etc. But they gave him a good wash and a scrub and changed his clothes and anointed him with this oil, which smelt like myrrh. And he said, "And I looked just like one of them, and all my fear and trembling left me." So it may be, and probably was, that they were very similar to us in many ways, and that they were wearing something like that Shane Warne wears when he plays cricket in Australia over his nose, which is a sunblock. And that would have protected these sensitive skins at a time when the Earth's atmosphere had been very severely disrupted. And it may be that Mars lost a large chunk of atmosphere at the same time. It would seem logical that the Earth lost atmosphere during that great catastrophe, 10,850, that something was going on Mars. And we do have a limited atmosphere on Mars. We have so much evidence of water, scarring from what is now believed to be massive lightning discharges. Thunderbolt's website, very, very important and interesting. And I was particularly interested in MarsAnomaly.com, where if you look into the Hale crater on Mars and enlarge it and look at it closely, it looks very like remains of human occupation. But that has to be proved one way or the other. And maybe people can go and have a close look and tell us what it actually is. But it looks very much like it. And I've got that on the lecture I gave at Megalithomania here in England, which is Learning from History Part 6. So all exciting things. We have also the issues about everybody on the planet, whatever color, creed, or race, have a common male at about 55,000 BC, and that shows up on the M158 Y chromosome marker. But of course, we have more complex DNA on the female side, and the female mitochondrial DNA tells us that a female branch goes back maybe to 150, 200,000 years BC. We're also told that the Y chromosome is fused on a human being, which is something we don't understand how that can be done, because it would seem it can only be done from outside. But those are accepted facts from the genetic establishment. And surely we're going to learn much more in the next 10, 20 years about that kind of subject. So I think hopefully one day we'll find out. But the key point about height is that the arrival of Cro-Magnon man about 55,000, 50,000 BC ties in with this M158 marker. And so maybe we're looking for something special going on with the arrival of Cro-Magnon, who's quite distinct from the other species in the eastern areas of Europe as opposed to the west coasts of Europe. And there is, when we look at all our ancestors, there aren't many cardboard boxes full of bones to be able to work out what happened. And that's, people are doing that. But from the records are that there were a lot of very tall people around, and we had a Roman emperor, Maximus, who was 9 feet tall and physically fit and able to take on everybody. So we have a very good record, physical record of very tall people in the past 8,000 years. Gilgamesh appears to be very tall. We've got a whole raft of excavated skeletons, which are very large. They can't all be forgeries. A difficult thing to forge. And so, but the clue, there's a clue here, which when you're a detective looking for clues, the interesting thing is that when we put fish into a tank and up the pressure, up the atmospheres in the tank, we find that they grow twice the normal size and live twice as long. And so if our Earth's atmosphere was very much denser prior to 10,850, it may well be that we see a lot of much larger species. So checking the record, yes, we do. We see mammoths, we find slopes, we find a whole saber-toothed tigers, we find a whole range of species, giant camels, which all give us the clues that with a denser atmosphere, then we certainly had much larger species on this planet within relatively recent times. That's the last 50,000 years. So they're all clues for people to look at and work on. And maybe a few giant humans. Well, there's two ways of looking at that, and that is the word descended has been mistranslated. Or alternatively, they did have some kind of flying machine and did land. You've got those two options to look at. O'Brien picks up many, many examples of flying machines in the Bible. We talk about unidentified flying objects, but the Bible's full of identified flying objects. And if we've got an advanced civilization that could genetically create our domesticated crops and our domesticated animals, then it wouldn't be very difficult for them to produce vehicles which flew. And of course, they are recorded. The Ruah is very well recorded in the Bible. And we have to keep open minds on that. And I think maybe the Vedic texts, we find some of those stories from much earlier times coming down, and obviously confusion too with cometary debris and things happening in space. So you just need to be able to look at everything in perspective and keep an open mind and see what you can pin down to the evidence that is available. Well, the Divine Council was made up principally of the Shining Ones, and the Divine Council was very important. We have lots of records of that. I believe that the first Divine Council was at Karsag in Enlil's great house, the Iker mountain house, Hersag, above the Rashaya Basin where the Garden of Eden was, and that's just below Mount Hermon. And then the Divine Council moved to Baalbek, and you seem to have the meetings of the gods or the Divine Council at the head of the two rivers. That's always assumed by many people to be the Tigris and Euphrates, but they haven't perhaps looked at the fact that the Baalbek watershed is the headwaters of the Litani and the Orontes. So if the head of the two rivers really should read the Litani and the Orontes, and that takes you right to the great spring at Baalbek, which I think makes far more sense. And also remember too, we only really began to learn about the Sumerian civilization in the 1850s, and now we know that there were great cities like Uruk at Mari, in the land of Canaan, in the Jordan Valley, and we've got much earlier dates now, dates for Jericho at 9000 BC, and so we have a tremendous amount of solid archaeological evidence of great sophistication, all sorts of things happening, which can be checked against the dating of seed grains and crops, which is something that we're told they can date seed grains to plus or minus 8 years.
Now at Lowe's, faster quotes start at the Lowe's Pro Desk. Got a material list handwritten on a sticky note or saved as a photo? Perfect. Bring it to us and get a quote in minutes. And if you don't see what you need on the shelf, we'll help you get it. You can access thousands of products beyond what's available in store or on Lowe's.com, right from the Lowe's Pro Desk. Build quotes faster and source the materials you need to keep your jobs moving. Just like that, at Lowe's.
Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine before they start. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents on average 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
I think that, it's, this is the whole point about it. I hope more and more people will begin to take the subject seriously, look at the Abraham work and prove or disprove it. I always say to people, well, prove it or disprove it. And nobody's yet come along and disproved it. The only problem we have are people like the Wikipedia people who won't even bother to read the book, drag up the most obscure research, and trying to establish this knowledge and get valuable information onto the web so that other people can make their contributions. That's quite a difficult thing to do. And I'm very patient. I'm very happy. I hope I live for another 20 years, so I should keep bashing away for the next 20 years, hoping the establishment will pick up some of the points that I'm making to you. But I'd like to mention a name, somebody called Martin Bernal, who's a very eminent professor who I believe is at Princeton, and he wrote a book called Black Athena. Now, Black Athena demolished the idea of the establishment in thinking that Greece was where it all started. He very cleverly and effectively showed that the Greek letters, our alphabet, came from the north, which was in fact from the Druids, in my opinion. And he also identifies the land of Canaan and Egypt too as a possible origin. And so he was way ahead of his time. But because he challenged all the Greek scholars, he made himself incredibly unpopular. And here was somebody stretching the boundaries of knowledge, doing a fantastic work. There's a marvelous book, The Black Athena, and the establishment is so rigid. If they've been to college, been to university, done their lessons in archaeology, they all think they know it. They don't want to have an open mind and have to relearn everything that they've been told. And this is the problem. It's a difficult one. That's right. One of the good things is that on some of the sciences, they would be very silly if they kept claiming the Earth was flat. So at astronomy and space, we seem to be rewriting the books every year. So at least some parts of the establishment and academia are being prepared to open their minds and add more information and do what our Druid friends or ancestors did, which was follow the secular pursuit of knowledge, the truth before the world. Well, we have Anne, who is the senior member, and he seems to have delegated and been moving around to other places, which one of them was clearly Baalbek at one point with Hadad. So it was Anne and Hadad. And there was one of the Sumerian cities, I think it was Asa, which was dedicated to those two. But that left Enlil and Enki and Ninkarsag. And so it was the 7 archangels plus Enlil, and Enlil became a name for God. And Enlil was a title. And where we get so wrong with what went on in those times was that the Enlil, as he's described in some of the texts, was the person who was the senior member of the Anunnaki Council. He also ties in with El Shaddai and El Elyon. And Lawrence Gardner's dealt with this very well in The Origin of God. This is Lawrence's latest book, written before he died. I do recommend people look at that. That is a pretty cheap paperback to read, but it gives the most comprehensive analysis of the origin of God and bases his work on the O'Brien thesis, for which I was very grateful. And I did a certain amount of work and collaboration with Lawrence on that. So the names that he used were titles. Gabriel, with an L on the end, and Raguel, Uriel. These names were, in fact, titles. And we have a proliferation of names, of different names of the same people, and the use of titles. So it's quite a problem in sorting out the genealogy and sorting out who was who. We seem to have very good agreement that Inanna was the daughter of Enlil and Ninkarsag, and also that Enki had children too. And in the much later city-states, you find those city-states were dedicated to one or more of the various gods, out of respect for them. They weren't as though they were living there, although the concept of God in the temple and a place for the Anunnaki at the top of the temple was talked about. But I think these were more symbolic and dedications and great respect by people who recognized just what their ancestor has done for them. And Anage were really the people of the god An, the Tuatha-Danann, the people of the god An. And the Hebrew translation is archangels. Angel translates as Engeli, which is Lord of a cultivation, which was a key part of the work they did. And so angels were lords of the cultivation. It's just that we deified these people in their absence, and it's got out of hand, you might argue. That, okay, the angels have wings. Well, Enoch describes 2 angels, very tall angels, visiting him and taking him up to Mount Hermon, and says that they had feathers, wearing feathers with the appearance of wings. But in those days, and you still find it in about 1920, with the Maori princess wearing a wonderful feathered coat. So feathers were used by the aristocracy, if you like, or lucky enough people to somebody has put the labor in to make a wonderful garment from feathers. We have the feathered serpent. Well, that means he had a feathered coat, and he was a serpent because he was a wise person. The word serpent always meaning wise person. the idea they might have been snakes comes along very, very much later when they were denigrated. You have the story of all the gods eventually denigrated when people wanted to impose their own particular belief system on their subjects or whatever, much later on. I'm not familiar with that particular passage, and I'll check it out. Yeah, clearly there's a clear distinction between Enlil, Enlil, and Enki, Enki. The history or the speculation on the subject suggests that these two disagreed with each other and fought wars, etc. If you look at Plato's accounts, which are excellent, I think, Plato was very anxious that people did not say bad things about the gods, particularly to children. And I think that, to be honest, these people had been through hell. They had an unbelievable task. Their social organization, from as I read it and look at it, and O'Brien translated, is absolutely superb. And they left us superb social organization. We think democracy is great, but Plato said democracy always leads to debt, bankruptcy, and chaos. And wasn't he right? And the old system of social organization was the appointment of a king on merit. He had to be trained for 20 years, and his job was to hold everything together and act as a representative of all the people. He didn't have possessions. He just simply had to make sure that everything ran smoothly and that justice was maintained, that he got the best advisors around him to advise on everything that was done, and people who were advisors had to have their 20-year training. And it was a very, very important system. We, and both you in America and Britain, we had a constitution. Our constitution for both of us was based on the 1688-89 Constitution and Rule of Law. And many countries around the world have that. And the concept there is the contract between the crown and the people, so that the crown and the monarch looks after the people. I'm not quite sure how it translates in America, but the principle is a tripartite arrangement of a balance between the powers of the crown. That's why we all swear our oath of allegiance to the Queen in this country, or we did do. Our MEPs are sent to Europe and don't have to swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen. We have a House of Lords, which I think is similar to the two breakdown between our House of Lords and Commons is similar to yours. And the idea was that the Lords is totally independent, not politically orientated, and when we have a House of Commons. Now, the idea from our Constitution is there should be a fair balance between those three bodies. We call it a triumvirate system, in order to get the best possible debate, the best possible people forward to deal with the problems on behalf of the people, on behalf of the monarch. And it's a partnership. And we developed that system. They did put the bishops and the church into the House of Lords, so the church had a role to play. There was the issue on maybe something like 1100 years of bitter feuding between the Catholic Church and the Crown and the dominance of the Pope. But we resolved all that in 1888 to 89 when we appointed a man and a woman as head of state. Mary, who was part of the British royal family, and William of Orange, who was a brilliant general and a super bloke, and everybody was pleased to have him around. And I went looking at some of the dockyard down at Devonport in Devon, which he was responsible for upgrading and improving for a British Navy. So I know I'm rambling on, but our Constitution and your Constitution is immensely important, so that we do not concentrate power into the hands of a small group of politicians, which is what has happened in Britain, with disastrous consequences. And those politicians have passed our sovereignty and those powers to a European Parliament, which is an even bigger disaster. And so I actually went to a meeting today and asked an MP, please, can we have our constitution back? and I think that's the same for most countries at the moment, because we need to be able to realize that if we have a division between our political parties, we're back to this idea of tribal groups building barriers and walls and waving spears at each other, when we all should be working together in total harmony, which was the way the ancient city-state system worked.
Now at Lowe's, faster quotes start at the Lowe's Pro Desk. Got a material list handwritten on a sticky note or saved as a photo? Perfect. Bring it to us and get a quote in minutes. And if you don't see what you need on the shelf, we'll help you get it. You can access thousands of products beyond what's available in-store or on Lowes.com, right from the Lowe's Pro Desk. Build quotes faster and source the materials you need to keep your jobs moving. Just like that, at Lowe's.
Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine before they start. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents on average 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
At a great city like Mari, which is unbelievably efficient, simple if you like, but absolutely amazing technology at 4000 BC, there were over 200 craft trades and guilds. And everybody self-interest, people trying hard, made the whole community thrive and prosper. And that's where we need to be today. So people actually work for each other and with each other for everybody else's interests at heart, and not to have rival bands. My God says this, your God says that, or whatever, or my politics is this, your politics is that. We actually have to wake up and realize that we must all work very closely together, whatever our color, or creed, or belief, or wherever we are on the planet. If we don't work together, when we will continue this dreadful slide towards extinction. We have an awful lot of clues, because we can look at the biblical information in the Hebrew Bible. We can look at the books of Enoch, which is a very detailed account of what appeared to be a brilliant observer who is asked to go up to the planted highlands and record all that was going on. And the icing on the cake from a totally independent source are what are called the Kar-Sag epics. Now, it was the Reverend Professor George Barton at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania who did the original translations, because he was the man at the time who had taken the trouble to understand that Sumerian cuneiform had evolved from a much earlier, very sophisticated, in fact, but simple picture language. And in order to be able to translate cuneiform, you have to understand where the cuneiform came from and how it changed totally over a 3,000 or 4,000 year period. So if you started with the latest cuneiform in Akkadian at 1000 BC, you'd never understand it, never translate it properly, unless you went right back to the beginning to see how it had evolved. And this, O'Brien did this, something which hardly anybody else has done. That's why he's unique. That's why he's special, because he realized the importance of that picture language. Now, that original picture language with an associated sound shows up on the Phaistos disk. And that's on the website for people to look at and see those lovely signs. And when you begin to look at all the various early symbols and signs, they tie in with this picture language. So the ordinary people were given a spatial, something that was easy to read, picture language, in the same way that when we in England drive across the continent, we all have road signs to look at, a standardized system of road signs, so we don't make any mistakes as to where we're going. And that's how the ordinary people, they were given a picture language which precedes Egyptian hieroglyphs, precedes all the other texts. Even the Indo-European texts would appear to be based on this picture language and are common symbols all around the world from 3000, 4000 BC. And I've got Learning from History Part 5. Waddell recognized that the Egyptian picture language, if you like, evolved from the very earliest Sumerian picture language. The other complication is that Enoch refers to writing and recording what was going on at Karsag, the Garden of Eden. And one of the quotes is that that Enki takes a pen or brings the books to Enoch to write. And Enoch writes with a quill pen in what is called the speedy writing. Now, the speedy writing was the alphabet, or Aleph Beg, as it's called in very early time. So the Aleph Beg, or the alphabetic text, was always there, going back to these very earliest times. And the Aleph Beg, or the alphabet, was in-house and kept in-house. And we see this coming right the way through to Druid times, where you have that particular form of a very efficient, very quick, speedy writing, very simple, speedy writing being used by the administrators. Ashburnapal, the great king in Assyria, says that he learnt the language or writing from before the flood at the kingship school. And there are many other references which give us the clues that there were those two quite different writing systems. So the alphabet, or the Aleph Beg, was very early. At the same time, very early on, were the pictorial symbols. Although the earliest signs we have are about 9000 BC, which are the tokens, the work of a lady called Shement Bassarat, I think it is, who showed that simple standardized tokens were in use from the time of Jericho right the way across the region of the Fertile Crescent. A standardized system of 2 bags of grain, 2 sheep, whatever it may be. And these were the first clay-fired objects found in the hearts of the ancient fires and stuck in cardboard boxes until she began to see how important they were. And it was a double entry system where a farmer would make a piece of clay, put his mark on it, and how many bags of grain or how many sheep he'd taken into the central communal center, which is the city-state, if you like, or the formative city-state. And so there's a double entry system. He had his records, they had a set, so that he was paid and could check his own production, which was paid into the community. And so this is, again, extraordinary examples of great sophistication, accounting, mathematics, sophisticated organization at these very early times. Well, you've got obviously an elite where the knowledge resides, and of course the knowledge on building resided with the masons, and the masons' job was to pass knowledge from father to son over thousands of years. And you find that extraordinary knowledge coming through the line of masons. And the Freemasons, of course, come along very much later. But the one class or group of people who passed knowledge from father to son, who survived, were the Masons, because much later on, when everything was knocked flat by cometary debris and wars and fighting, the first thing a king wanted was the Masons to build it all together, build it up again. So yeah, you've got different people having different needs. If you really just want to record how many sheep or how many bags of grain you take into the center of Jericho, then that's a simple job for the farmer, very straightforward, something you can cope with. When you're talking about the building of the Baalbek platform and also the pyramids, where you have the most extraordinary technological skills being deployed. It may well be that was much later. Certainly the pyramids were built 2,500 BC, most of them within a 100-year period. And the blocks were massive. It may have been concrete. It may have been, I don't know. We've got a lot of ideas on what it was made with and how it was constructed, but there must have been a much greater sophistication than we can imagine. But Baalbek, there are 3 850-ton stones, beautifully, perfectly cut, fitted together, so you can hardly get a knife or a razor blade between the joins, on top of, I think it's 16 450-ton blocks of that particular limestone, which has a specific gravity, which allows you to calculate accurately the weights. And in the quarry, there are 2 stones. In fact, not many people know this, and I didn't until recently, but there are still 2 stones in the quarry. One weighs 1,250 tons, which is the stone of the south, which is tipped at an angle. And there is another stone which doesn't look as though it was completed, which is 1,450 tons. And so the level of there was a 1,250-ton obelisk in the Aswan quarry of pink granite. And that clearly was a fault in it and lays there now because it had a fault. But they were very ambitious on what they moved and how they moved things. They even took pink granite to these massive columns, 64-foot high columns of the Baalbek temple. So that those pink granite was taken from the Aswan quarry in southern Egypt by sea up the Nile, and by sea to Byblos, or one of the ports, and then up to 3,500 feet above sea level. And so that was another incredible engineering feat, something which the Romans just couldn't have done. And we can't ignore that and many other examples of incredible skill. And there's lots more besides. So we've got to take them seriously. We've got to recognize that there were very clever people around. That seems to be the case, that the individual crafts and trades, particularly in metallurgy and metals, had this knowledge, which they didn't allow outside their particular circle. If you're a major craftsman and your living depends on doing something really well, you don't want to give your trade secrets to somebody else. It's the same commercially today. But it was, remembered, a role-type society. Everybody had their place, their role, their craft, their trade, including men and women. And remember, there was a total equality between men and women. All the communities had a man and a woman, Yahweh and Asherah, they were called, in the land of Judea, Hebraic land of Dan, the whole of that area. And it was that was the tradition of a mayor and mayoress. It didn't have to be a wife; it simply was a consort. So that every community always had a man and a woman leading it, which is very important. And I think we need to get back to that very quickly.
Now at Lowe's, faster quotes start at the Lowe's Pro Desk. Got a material list handwritten on a sticky note or saved as a photo? Perfect. Bring it to us and get a quote in minutes. And if you don't see what you need on the shelf, we'll help you get it. You can access thousands of products beyond what's available in-store or on Lowes.com, right from the Lowe's Pro Desk. Build quotes faster and source the materials you need to keep your jobs moving. Just like that, at Lowe's.
I get so many headaches every month.
It could be chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those who have 14 or fewer headache days a month. Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia myasthenia gravis or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor. Visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
There have been many events, and our astrophysicists who weren't taken seriously 10 or 15 years ago have put together a remarkable amount of information now. And as I say, the key book is Richard Firestone's The Cycle of Cosmic Catastrophe, Paul Laviolette's book called Earth Under Fire. We've got issues now about an electric universe, very important. We also are talking now about the Earth's magnetic field possibly reversing several times in the last several 100,000 years. When the Earth's magnetic field reverses on the sun, it gives massive nuclear explosions. These are all subjects which are being discussed openly, and there's a great deal of information on the Thunderbolts website, for example. And we now can date several important events: the 10,850 event, the 3,129 BC event, which was a massive cometary explosion over the Austrian Alps at Kofels, which was recorded on a planisphere by the Sumerian astronomers, would you believe? And then the real wipeout or end of the Golden Age, the great Golden Age civilizations and city-states, that came to an end at 2,345 BC, 150 years after that massive spate of pyramid building. And it's my belief that they knew that there was a potential for another big wipeout. And that's why all the pyramids were built so rapidly on the Giza plateau, and why the pyramids are accompanied by massive chambers, water supplies, places to store food, etc., etc. And they knew there was a big problem coming. They didn't know how bad it would be, but they took precautions. We're saying the same thing in England. We find henges which are open clearly for observational astronomy, and then all being turned into what now called chambered tombs, but structures which people could go inside and take cover from the thing that they were almost frightened of, which was the sky falling. The same with the long barrows in Britain. We had an enormous amount of sophistication in Britain, because 60–70% of the people who lived in Britain all came from that area of Canaan, something that L.A. Waddell talks about, the Phoenician origins of the British and the Scots, the Irish and the Welsh, if you like. They named the various planets and the various objects in the sky, which were terrifying and frightening. They named them after gods. Plato will tell you that the gods were totally benevolent, and so were many other ancient historians. The gods were totally benevolent, and we use the names of gods for things happening in the sky, which was the terror which rained down from the sky, and blame the gods. And it's a way in which mankind thinks or thought over that 10,000-year period, where it's deified the gods, blame the gods, worship the gods. When things go right, it's great. When things go wrong, the Enuma Elish is very interesting, and I think it was a man called Spicer who identified that the Enuma Elish is word for word, line for line, the same as the early chapters of Genesis, or very similar. And there is this reference to the making of man. Now, what we have to look at, I believe, is the kind of sophistication which we now know the ancients had. Very briefly, I'll say that talk to any of the leading botanists in the world, and they will tell you that they have now found that hybridization only takes place where there were ancient peoples. They can replicate that hybridization in every respect, but they can't get the seed production. In other words, the ancients who hybridized plants had a step ahead of where we are now today. Now, the domestication of crops and animals, very similar, sophistication, genetic modification of an incredibly high standard. So when we hear and see the making of man, of Adam and Eve, we're talking about in vitro fertilization to create people who clearly had the genes of the Anunnaki and crossed with the genes of a local people. O'Brien deals with this in some detail, and I think the further on we've moved since he wrote the first book in '83, we're now aware much more of the reality and practicality of in vitro fertilization of human beings. And so there clearly was a suggestion that there were people created in that way, the way we would do it today, at that particular time. The story of Adam and Eve has been very stylized to fit in with our particular religious history. Eve was, of course, sinful. She was spoken to by the serpent in the Garden of Eden, which we believe is the enclosure of Enlil's great house. We know where it is, near Mount Hermon. But I think the serpent wasn't a snake. The serpent was one of the archangels, one of the wise men. They were either two-eyed serpents, which meant they were senior rank to the angels who were one-eyed serpents. And so the Adam and Eve story has been corrupted. We also have the Cain and Abel story too, which is very similar to Osiris and Seth, and then eventually the birth of Horus. And when we begin to look at all these stories, we can see that they all come from that one original source. And us, if you like, mortals, much later on, have made those stories fit our ideas and our religions, whereas I believe that the intent right from the start was a totally benevolent attempt to provide a workforce, provide different people, different skills, different abilities, to make the royal society work brilliantly. And this is what we see. We see the angels, or the archangels, senior angels, watchers, being the culture bearers who are talked about in every historical tradition around the world. And they really were the culture bearers who took the technology around the world for agriculture and civilization. And that included the original building of knowledge at Karsag or Eden, a whole range of experiments with in vitro fertilization. Well, that did happen between the some of the watchers and the local women, and it didn't go down very well for various reasons. You know, these are issues which we've got some written evidence to give us some clues. We have to try and read between the lines and establish clearly there was in vitro fertilization. The reasons given is because they needed a workforce to be able to do all the jobs which they planned. And we hopefully will find out a great deal more when some of our key academics pick up the subject and run with it and help us to translate the texts as they should be translated, do the genetic research that needs to be done. Everybody, as I said, everybody on the planet goes back to that common M158 marker at 55,000 BC, which seems to coincide with Cro-Magnon man. So we are all incredibly closely related. There's always this issue about, oh, I'm a descendant of so-and-so, but the population dynamics over 10,000 years means that we are all very closely related, and none of us have any rights whatsoever according to bloodlines. So that's been something that's been terribly confusing and terribly misleading and not very nice, really, to say you're better than somebody else because. That's one of the great human failings, is that we don't love and care for each other as much as we should. So that's all I can add to it. I'm positive about it. I don't think it was, and I think the idea of a slave race is utter nonsense. Slaves in the very earliest city-states had rights to buy land. A slave simply meant you hadn't paid your debts, therefore you became what was called a bonded servant until you paid your debts. We had bonded servants on the streets of England in the 1920s when people needed work and where they stood on street corners waiting for somebody to come along to take them off for a job. And the whole business of slavery was very strictly organized and run fairly for the whole benefit of the whole community in the city-state golden age system. It's only much later that it became totally abused. And what is more abusive than the way in which we treat human beings today, in comparison, in my opinion, to the way that we looked after people wonderfully prior to 2345 BC. Amazing operation. And clearly, a lot of them broke ranks because they were human, and then they saw very pretty girls down in the lowlands, and they did what humans do. You know, what's changed? And I think maybe the guys in charge felt that it had got out of hand. I don't think we can build much more into it than that. I don't think we should. And I think that we're all very, very clever putting our noses into other people's dirty washing, but we don't need to. We shouldn't do. And it's a human story, and we find many human stories here within the Karsak epics of both Enlil and Enlil and Enki both getting food poisoning, and clearly described. So they were just like us. They enjoyed a glass of wine. They enjoyed a good party. They ate meat, and they had their failings. The lady Ninkarsag got very upset and cried in front of the council. You know, you're dealing with real live people who were our ancestors, very, very, very similar to us. And it's very important to see this and to realize this and have respect for them, as all the subsequent knowledgeable people had immense respect for them.
Now at Lowe's, faster quotes start at the Lowe's Pro Desk. Got a material list handwritten on a sticky note or saved as a photo? Perfect. Bring it to us and get a quote in minutes. And if you don't see what you need on the shelf, we'll help you get it. You can access thousands of products beyond what's available in-store or on Lowe's.com, right from the Lowe's Pro Desk. Build quotes faster and source the materials you need to keep your jobs moving. Just like that, at Lowe's.
I get so many headaches every month.
It could be chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox onabotulinum toxin A prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those who have 14 or fewer headache days a month. Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor. Visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
I would add, too, about the Sumerian kings. The one thing that L.A. Waddell did was to get the chronology right on the Sumerian kings. And the first or oldest Sumerian king was 3,370 BC. In other words, there was a big mistake made over the Icene text by one man at Cambridge who got all the numbers wrong. And the first Sumerian king was really to pull together the city-states in the region and they appointed what we would call a king of kings, of Brabor in Saxon, Shishak in Sumeria, Ozymandias in Greek, a Pendragon in England, and they took the senior king in times of difficulty, either by usually weather, poor harvests. They would pull things together, and it was a pulling together of all the city-states in the region. That's why we get the origin of the Sumerian people. But the Sumerians were always there. They didn't come in from anywhere else. They were always in that area, and they evolved from the people from the land of Canaan. Well, there was a Noah who was a king in Sumer when there was a flood, a very big flood in the Mesopotamian valley, and that was very well recorded by Leonard Woolley when he did his excavations in Ur, and was a big layer of silt, and they've got the dates for that, which was round about the time when we saw a peak in sea levels, and there may have been natural disaster regions for that flood. So there were many floods and many recorded floods, and the latest big flood would have been recorded by the Sumerians. So we had the first massive movement of water was when the earth tipped on its axis. Enoch describes this record of the earth being realigned on its axis, and there was a lot of evidence for the movement of the earth on its axis and the oceans literally washing across the landmass. And in the States, there's a suggestion that the Salt Lakes, where the seawater stopped against the Rockies, that's where you have evidence of massive quantities of water washing across the whole of the country. And this shows up in the geological record all over the place with caves full of debris. So the big flood was 10,850, but there were many other floods later on. And the biblical flood, the confusion between much later floods, in particular the one in Mesopotamia about 4000 BC, so some 6,000 years later. Enoch, as I understand it, is a Hebrew name for somebody who was called Thoth, who was called Hermes. He may have even been called Mercury. He was the messenger or the scribe of the gods. Difficult to pin it down, but clearly he was a very important early figure. The books of Enoch were considered so important that they were included in the Christian church canon, and only removed from the collection or canon of important books by St. Jerome in about 290. And they were always thought to be, by the elders of the church, a forecast or a prophecy of something that was going to happen in the future. And O'Brien makes the point when clearly the books of Enoch were a very accurate and detailed account of something that happened in the past. So we can describe Enoch as the original great historian, and probably the same person as Thoth, and certainly very much involved with writing, because he was there to record the books of the gods. So the gods had already had books, but they wanted their records to be copied and kept by Enoch. In fact, the books that Enoch is supposed to have recorded and written down were lost in a later flood, an example of a later flood taking place. But as I say, a lot of these are all clues for researchers to make their own contributions. And if we can get more people making contributions on the subject, it will be really helpful, because I think we can move everything forward. Just very quickly on Jericho, the latest research from the Jerusalem University is that the tower at Jericho was used for observational astronomy, a marker on the side of a hill. So they were very much into observational astronomy at 9000 BC. That's the hot latest news. And Kathleen Kenyon, when she excavated Jericho, found amazing sophistication in the construction of the tower at Jericho and the stonework with slabs, and said it wouldn't disgrace a medieval castle. In addition to that, there's a rock-cut ditch right round the original Jericho, which is about 30 feet wide by 9 feet deep, cut through solid rock. And that's what we find in the great watercourse that went out of Eden to water the garden in the Rashaya Basin. We don't know how on earth they cut that rock. So there was great sophistication at Jericho, great sophistication at the Garden of Eden side. Now, Göbekli Tepe is wonderful. It's the top of a hill, and it may well have been built during the Younger Dryas or even before the Younger Dryas. The point about being on the top of the hill was that in the very cold weather, if you were on the top of the hill, you got the maximum amount of sun, which meant it was warmer. You find the same thing in New Mexico on the tops of hills with the Clovis people, at the boundary between the Clovis and the Folsom people. And if there are animals still alive, and you are hunting animals, or a gazelle or antelope, and you're on the top of a hill, you can see where your breakfast, lunch, and tea is moving down below, and you go downhill before you catch them or spear them or whatever you do. It's much easier to do that from the top of a hillside. Now, at Göbekli Tepe, all the uprights, and there's 126 of them, are literally prefabricated, standardized T-posts, which would have supported a massive roof, then covered with earth. There was timber used clearly, so when that timber rotted, then the roof fell down, and that's where they think it was filled in later. It was simply the roof collapsing after a period of time when the timber had rotted. Now, on the post, you find every conceivable species that were moved around in that area recorded in beautiful carvings. And it was clearly an outpost of angels, watchers, whatever, people exploring the region. And these are the kind of descriptions we have in the books of Enoch. So it is contemporary with Karsag, which is the Garden of Eden site. It certainly wasn't a farming center because it was too cold, 800 years behind the southern Bekaa and the Dead Sea Valley. So it wasn't farming. It was on the top of a hill, good reasons to be on the top of the hill, although they would have had to carry their water up there, as far as I can see. But Göbekli Tepe is fantastic because it's an example of sophistication which links in with the Garden of Eden site and Jericho at the same dates, and therefore I believe they're connected. And this is very important. There've been a lot of people banging this bandwagon about agriculture starting in Turkey, Anatolia, around Göbekli Tepe. There is not any evidence or any dating which puts crops in that area, reliable evidence which puts crops out in the area. And from the bioarchaeological record, as I said, it was 800 years behind in terms of the big increase in temperatures. And many of those crops were first possibly domesticated crops, which then went wild for the origins of the earliest wheats and barleys and many of the other crops, and not the area of Anatolia or north of the Tigris and Euphrates.
I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.